Right?
Okay. Plug us in.
One of the most unique aspects of Alien's production design is all of the mechanical analog clutter filling the Nostromo's interior. And yet, there's this overwhelming sense that everything you're looking at is totally real, functional, and well used. Well, that's because it is.
What the hell are you talking about?
I've never seen anything like it.
When the crew behind Alien began building the sets, production designer Michael Seymour realized a big problem. The $8.3 million they had received from Fox was not going to be enough, saying, "We realized that it was in fact not a great deal of money." The actual cost for what they wanted to do was more than expected, and Seymour had to reduce the original estimates by 40%. And Fox was constantly breathing down their necks and insisting that they reuse sets and adapt existing items to keep the costs down. Seymour got a hold of the finances of the first Star Wars movie, which Fox had just released. He wanted something to measure Alien's budget against, and what he found was kind of shocking. Alien and Star Wars had basically the same budget, but Alien needed much fewer visual effects shots. So how did Star Wars manage to get so many great sets out of the same budget? Well, luckily they already had the guy responsible for decorating the Star Wars sets, who by the way won an Academy Award for his work.
Don't everybody thank me at once.
This is Alien art director Roger Christian. Seymour tasked him with everything Nostromo, while the other art director, Les Dilley, who also worked on Star Wars, would handle everything on the planetoid and the derelict ship. The art department had a small budget of $2 million, and they were under enormous pressure to basically design beyond the concept art themselves in a short amount of time. Christian stressed the importance of set dressing by people who understood the logic of the sets, and to ensure that they were going in the right direction, the team first built and dressed a section of corridor for Sigourney Weaver's screen test.
How does that happen?
It happens, my dear, because that's what the company wants to happen.
Since when is that standard procedure?
This wasn't a choice. When head of Fox, Alan Ladd Jr. first met the production's pick to play Ripley, he insisted that they make a screen test. Pressed for time and only a couple weeks away from production, director Ridley Scott had a clever idea: have the art department build a section of corridor for the test so that he could test the set design, lighting, and color at the same time they are testing Weaver. They filmed her in a few different lighting styles, and when they saw the rushes, everyone realized just how masterful Scott was at getting amazing visuals. The test was successful, with the only note being that Sigourney Weaver not smoke in the movie, because she looks ridiculous. Christian and his team began building out the sets using the method he developed on Star Wars. Instead of building everything, he would dress the sets with real old machinery and junkyard scraps. The other art director, Les Dilley, estimated they must have spent thousands of dollars on scrap metal and junk, particularly from old jet aircraft engines. To build out the sets, they started with industrial pallets and added aircraft piping on top. While this sounds like a lot, this would look more realistic and would cost a lot less than trying to build everything from scratch. They would assemble the pieces like a sculpture, add fake stains, stenciled numbers and symbols, and even spray painted some of the scrap metal to look like plastic. Scott recalled Christian taking him to a bomber graveyard and explaining to him how if they bought 2 large scraps, they could actually recoup some money by later selling off the titanium parts, as they were very expensive. But Star Wars had a much bigger element of fantasy.
I got him! Great kid! Don't get cocky!
So on Alien, Christian felt he could go much further with the oily, gritty look. He said he thought it was the first time anyone created a truly believable, quote-unquote, space truck. So they basically had dismantled bomber planes and reconstructed the parts into a spaceship. This is why it looks so convincing. Everything you see has at one time been actually functional and used. It reminds me of Stanley Kubrick's principle of trying to not create anything from scratch, because why rely on a movie crew to design a chair when you can just use a chair that was designed by a chair designer who has devoted their entire life to designing chairs? This is why the interior of the hotel in The Shining was copied from the interior of an actual hotel, and why he even said that if he had to make fake rubble, he would find some real rubble and copy it. But Ridley Scott needed to push things further to really make this spaceship feel both unique to the audience and at the same time mundane and lived in for the characters, which is why he used a couple of pretty weird techniques to make the details of the ship stand out in your mind. But before we get into that, did you know that you can stream Alien on Disney Plus in Canada or Australia, or pretty much anywhere besides the United States? We here in the States are out of luck unless you use today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. It's easy. You just click on Canada, and Atlas VPN changes your IP address to make it appear that you are in Canada, and it opens you up to everything that is available in that country. And you can do this with all sorts of movies and TV shows. Atlas VPN is the best VPN deal on the market. You can get it for only $1.83 per month, plus an extra 3 months and a 30-day money-back guarantee when you click the link in the description. And it doesn't just help you get movies. Atlas VPN will stop ads and malware, block malicious links, keep your Google searches hidden from trackers, and notify you when someone is trying to steal your data.
Wait a minute. If we let it in, the ship could be infected. You know the quarantine procedure.
24 hours for decontamination.
And here's the best part. You can protect all of your devices on a single subscription. Grab this limited time deal now. Click the link in the description to get 3 years of Atlas VPN for only $1.83 per month, plus an extra 3 months for free. And now back to the show. Despite the rough look the filmmakers were going for, Scott decided to make much of the set gold and glittery. The effect was subtle, but most notable in the opening shots as the computers wake up and in the maintenance garage. These columns were jet engine remains turned on end and sprayed gold and dressed with gold foil. The idea was to create a look similar to the columns in an ancient temple, and it was also sort of a reference to the original Moonlander. To fill the equipment room, they found exotic-looking digging equipment such as small bulldozers and spray-painted them gold to match the look of the room. This machine here was a tank track mixed with shell casings. The walls of the corridors were sprayed a metallic gunmetal gray with gold dusting, but Scott felt they still looked flat. To fix this, he attached a box to the front of every dolly to hold gold and silver spray cans, so he could quickly fill in areas he needed while lining up a shot. Scott wanted the ship to look lived in and cluttered. Screenwriter Dan O'Bannon gave Scott some advice, having used this idea for comedic effect in Dark Star, saying that to make the ship look really beat up, make the set 3 times messier than he wants it to look on screen. While using function as a base level, sometimes Scott opted to go for something more atmospheric than realistic, such as in this scene. Scott had to fight to add the chains and the water dripping from the ceiling, which others thought was too low-tech and questioned the source of the water. Scott gave the excuse of condensation for the water and that they still had to raise and lower things in the future for the chains, though really he didn't care about the reasons. If you've seen my Blade Runner video, you'll know why. Sometimes you just need some movement in the frame. While filming the opening tour around the ship while the crew is still asleep, Scott had the idea to add some movement of the papers being blown by the ship's air conditioning. Christian ran to the hair and makeup area to grab a blow dryer and stood just out of frame to get the movement in this shot. And then there's the drinking plastic birds. The idea of the computer readouts reflected in the emergency helmets came to Scott as he saw the set coming together. He had the idea that it would give a sinister effect, as though the computers were talking to each other. Scott noted that the cockpits of even the most sophisticated fighter planes are pretty basic in terms of the look, and he wanted to keep things raw and real. The cockpit or bridge set in the movie was made using discarded mechanical equipment, including pieces of aircraft, automobiles, radios, and television sets. To film the monitors without showing scan lines, cinematographer Derek Van Lint suggested shooting at 25 frames per second rather than 24, and it worked pretty well aside from a couple of times in the detonation scene, but it added to the chaos. The seats that the crew sit in are also real. In a meeting with his team, Christian asked for discarded aircraft or jet pilot seats to be found and put on sliders. So the bomber-like seats for the crew of the Nostromo were actual bomber seats. Christian added special harnesses for the crew to strap in, and some old levers for several flight controls. Christian said special effects supervisor Nick Alder had adapted flight controls from the airplane scrap and made them so they could tilt back and forth and side to side. We also had throttle-type sliders placed behind the seats like engine thrust controls. We'd built banks and banks of switches. Sometimes you can spend weeks laying on layers of stuff and it looks terrible, and then, one day, it finally works. An early and important project for the art department and effects technicians were the electric control panels that would be seen throughout the Nostromo. Alder and his team developed real hardware for the practical switches on the bridge from Ron Cobb sketches and Scott's ideas. Technicians Dennis Lowe and Guy Hudson spent about 2 months making panels for the bridge over the spring, averaging about 4 a day in their workroom at Shepperton Studios. The set's hundreds of switches, dials, and buttons were actually functional. They controlled lights, doors, alarms, and the 40 TV screens in the bridge. Sigourney Weaver said, What I thought was so funny was that Ridley had gone through great lengths to make sure that all of the things at our consoles were very real, but when we came to shoot that first scene where we're talking to each other, we weren't allowed to push any buttons on the real consoles because of the camera angles and because prop men were hiding at our feet making things move. We had to push buttons in the air.
Status on the lifters.
Give me an AC pressure reading.
When the cameras were specifically showing them manipulating the screens, each button was specifically rigged to what needed to happen. Harry Dean Stanton said, "We had specific buttons to press so it didn't look like we were arbitrarily pressing buttons, but for the most part, they were mock-ups." In the scene where the Nostromo lands on the planetoid, screenwriter Dan O'Bannon had subverted the conventional smooth landings of sci-fi movies with a difficult and harsh landing because of his experiences with turbulence and air travel. The crew shaking in their seats was first done by putting paint mixers under the seats to make them vibrate, but Scott thought the shaking was too rapid, so they did it in the most low-tech way possible. A guy crouched below the frame and physically shook them. O'Bannon later said that this scene was the closest in the movie to the way he envisioned it in the writing. Going hand in hand with the budget was the challenge of time. Production was originally scheduled for 13 weeks, but this was adjusted to 17 weeks after production started, which was more realistic but still pretty tight. Seymour commanded a crew of 100 construction workers and prop men while working at least 6 days a week for those 17 weeks, and 7 days a week, sometimes until midnight, for 11 of those weeks. The filmmakers were under pressure to save time and money during production, with a Fox executive frequently inspecting sets and tearing down unauthorized construction, which obviously irritated Scott and Seymour, who wanted to come up with more ideas for sets. One time, the executive canceled a construction, then Scott reapproved it, then the executive canceled it again, and so on.
It was tense because the budget was very low, and there were, within the first 4 days of shooting, there were 9 producers and studio executives on the set, just counting the minutes on Ridley and complaining and why wasn't he shooting, and he was shooting so fast. They gave him no pre-light time, so he was trying to find the look in the first 2 days. And one of the producers, I remember, came to me on the 4th day and said, "Why is he taking so long?" And I said to him, "I don't understand what you're saying. He's doing 40 setups, 50 a day sometimes. The stuff looks amazing. I don't know what you're all doing."
One of Scott's favorite sets was the infirmary, which he had to fight for because of its shape. He was adamant that it should be circular, which always costs more money because of the increase in surface area over flat walls and straight floors. Of course, he got his way and loved how it turned out. The air vent also caused budget arguments. Scott wanted to expand it, but the compromise was to build a 30-foot stretch of vent with a T-section in the middle so they could reuse it to give the illusion that it kept going. Christian said, "There were a lot of depressed discussions about what sets to lose. Some sets were amalgamated with each other to save costs, and some destined to be revamped, which did save a lot of money. After each set finished filming, it had to be torn down to make space for new sets, which is why few of the production materials still exist. The bridge set ended up getting turned into the interior of the Narcissus, the autodock became the engine room, the mess area became the airlock vestibule, and the hypersleep room became the food locker. One cost-saving measure was to make the set smaller, and this worked perfectly to create the claustrophobic feeling that makes the movie so scary. Using techniques in the production design to make the audience feel on edge is the subject of the next episode, which you can find right here when it's ready. Or check out this video on how the producers took the original script to the next level by inventing one of Alien's most important aspects, and the crazy battle over screenwriting credit that ensued.